Welcome to the Special Needs Kids Are People Too podcast with Amy Bodkin, EDS. Amy is an autistic adult who also happens to be a school psychologist turned special needs consultant and public speaker. She's also a homeschooling mom to 2 autistic kiddos, a yoga instructor, a card-carrying Trekkie, and an all-around fun person. And last but not least, Amy is an advocate for seeing every child as a person, not a diagnosis. Because a special needs kid is just like any other child, just more so. Here's Amy Bodkin.
Hi, I'm Amy Bodkin, and welcome back to another special episode of Special Needs Kids Are People Too. Memorial Day weekend, I spoke at the 47th Annual ABAI Convention. Last week, you got to hear about some of the highlights from my first symposium towards ABA reform, what it means to do no harm. Today, I'd like to focus our thoughts on the topic of my second symposium, which was Nurturing Neurodivergence, a glance toward a humbler and more inclusive field of applied behavior analysis. With me today, I have a special guest, Amber O'Neal Johnston from Heritage Mom. Welcome, Amber O'Neal Johnston. We're very excited to have you on the podcast today, or at least I am anyways. I would love to let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about who you are and what Heritage Mom is and how you got started with Heritage
I would love to.
Mom.
Thanks for having me today. So I am Amber O'Neal Johnston. As you mentioned, I live just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. My husband Scott and I, we have 4 kiddos. They are 11, 9, 7, and 5, and no one has had their birthdays yet this year, so we will be on even numbers soon enough. I've been homeschooling the children from the beginning, but I am a big proponent also of our local public schools. My parents were both public school principals, so I know it's crazy. And my sister was on the school board in my hometown. So I am deeply invested in all forms of children's education. So yeah, it's
That's
a
awesome.
unique story, very unique background.
Yeah.
I blog at heritagemom.com and Heritage Mom blog on Instagram, and I mostly talk about opportunities for children to see themselves in their books and other aspects of their lives, whether it's things that they're listening to or watching, places they're going, things they're participating in, organizations that they're a part of. And I kind of came to that. I fell into it. I didn't have this big philosophical idea of this business I was going to start or this brand I was going to launch. In fact, I always say I was just a mom, like sitting there in the house with my kids. And early on, I had prepared all of these wonderful materials and resources for my oldest child as I began formal school lessons with her. And everything was just so rich. I had researched a lot of different educational philosophies and how children learn. And I felt like I was finding the best of the best in terms of what we were reading, the music we were listening to. We were reading poetry and reciting Bible verses, and we were reading plays and going to musicals and orchestra concerts and spending so much time outside in nature. And I had read Last Child in the Woods, and I was so inspired by that book. And I just had the idea that I was going to provide a beautiful education for my children, and I was on my way. And along that same time, during that same time, I was awakened one night with someone was on the side of my bed. I'm a very light sleeper. I could feel a presence next to me. And I opened my eyes, and it was my daughter. And I was like, oh, okay. She was crying. And I thought, well, what's wrong, honey? I assumed she had a nightmare or something. And she said, I hate the way that I look. I hate my skin, and my hair is disgusting. And I was shocked by this. I mean, I had seen signs building up to that, in that I knew she hid her black baby dolls in the back of the closet. And I found them one day, and I asked her about that. And she said she put them back there because they were ugly, and she only wanted to play with the pretty white dolls. And so I knew that there were problems brewing. and I was trying to get to the source of it. But that night when she came to my bedside, I was just completely devastated. So I kind of, took that opportunity. Of course, I held her and I told her all the good things about herself and all those lies that she was believing. But at the same time, I started running through my mind, like, what is going on? And for a lot of people, they point to things outside of their homes as a cause for what's happening inside the home. But in my case, I couldn't do that because I was her teacher and her mom, and all of her inputs were funneled through me. So anything that got to her was something that I overtly provided or that I allowed. And so there was no one to cast a finger at. I couldn't point a finger to anybody. I just had to sit there and deal with, why does my child feel this way? And so we went through this for several months and lots of conversations and other disturbing things that she said. And where we eventually landed was where she expressed to me that I told her we learn important things. We spend our time learning important things. And she said, and we only learn about white people. So those are the important people. And that was devastating. Yeah, it was very eye-opening. And I thought, okay, now I'm getting to the root of it. Now I'm understanding where this craziness is coming from. And I realized I was providing for her the education that I received, the education that I saw everyone else online doing. I was taking her to the places that all the other moms in the mom groups were taking her. And I was doing all the things that everyone around me was doing. And it looked so good. And what I realized was that I was mothering their children. I was copying their mothering, but I wasn't mothering the child that I had. And it was in that moment that I decided to commit myself personally to expressing our culture for her in the way that I wore my hair, in the things that I talked about, all the things I wanted her to be proud of, I committed to being proud of. And then I changed a lot of our curriculum and a lot of her environment, even down to her bedspread. And the images that were on there that I thought the last thing she sees before she goes to bed every night. So that is how Heritage Mom was born. It's kind of a long story, but I came to a place where I wanted to share with other parents what I had learned. And that was that children need to see themselves, however they show up, reflected in the world around them.
And now for a word about our sponsors. Today's sponsors are me and a Charlotte Mason Plenary. You can find out more about my advocacy work, working with parents and professionals to provide support for special needs families and children, and encouraging people to see children as people at amybodkin.com. Charlotte Mason Plenary is a homeschool company that supports children of all sorts of different types of needs with finding a curriculum that is a perfect fit for you and your family, doing it your way. Definitely check out the free 20 Principles study. It is fantastic. There are videos for Charlotte Mason's 20 Principles beginning with Children Are Born Persons, which is why she is my favorite educational philosopher. You can find out more about a Charlotte Mason Plenary and check out the 20 Principles study at cmplenary.com. I love your story, and I think a lot of parents can relate to the idea that you're parenting someone else's child and not the child that's right in front of you. I hear that from a lot of families who have kids with some kind of a special need, whether they've got some kind of trauma in their lives or some kind of chronic illness or a learning difference. They're thinking about that golden average child because that's what all of the curriculums and all of the parenting books tend to speak to. But they're not looking at the child that's right in front of them and recognizing how that has to be different. Because we don't tend to think about it.
I know, it seems kind of, it's just a default. Like you kind of, there's a way, a kind of their best practices. And if you learn those best practices and then you execute with, diligence and consistency, and you love, and lots of love, you love them, right? Then things will all turn out the right way. And so it took a lot of time for me to realize that the right way for my child is what works for her, and also to feel confident in what I was doing without feeling like there was something wrong with what other people were doing. I realized like those poems, that music, those
Yeah.
books, they actually were really good. I wasn't wrong about that. It's just that they weren't enough for my kid. And that doesn't mean that I see someone else using them and think, oh, shame on them. For me personally, I think right on. You found what worked for
Hmm.
your family, and I have to find what works for mine.
Exactly. And I think, when my kids were small, all three of us, me and both kids, are autistic. And one of the things that I found when my daughter was really small was my mom one time, I think I told you this, she said, "Amy, you're acting more autistic." Because when I was younger, especially, and up until very recently, most of the time we teach kids who are autistic to mask, to look like everybody else, but that doesn't teach us to value and appreciate and love ourselves and be able to be the best people that we can be. And so it was that moment where she pointed that out to me that I kind of realized, if I want my kids to be able to love who they are and to appreciate what's wonderful about them, and to not be so focused on the things that are challenging for them, then I've got to appreciate me and to find that confidence. We talk about this in psychology, actually. Well, you have Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's a pyramid. And at the bottom, you have your physical needs, and then you have your safety needs. And then after that, you have love and belonging. And it's not until after that that you get to self esteem. And what I've come to realize from studying that is that self esteem comes from when we feel love and belonging in the truest, healthiest sense possible. If we don't feel like people really truly see and value and respect who we are as people, we don't reach self esteem, because you can't give a
Oh,
child self
that's
esteem,
so true.
but you
Yes,
can
that's
give
so
them healthy
true. One
love.
of the things that I've noticed,
Yeah.
I've recently been talking about the concept of like roots and branches, and basically exactly what you just said. And not only does it impact the child's ability to reach self esteem, I also find that children cannot spread their branches out to have relationships, deep, authentic relationships and connection with other people when their own roots have not been watered well. And so I think it's like twofold. You want the best for your child, but also, especially in today's talks throughout society, we're talking about building bridges and people coming together and inclusivity. And I'm thinking to myself, like, you can't ask a child to expend emotional energy being authentically tethered to another group of people or another person when they don't even know themselves and don't feel that they belong in this space. So I see it as like it's the best thing for my child, which makes it the best thing for my family. But I also think that all of us coming together and ensuring this kind of tethering for all children is the best thing for our communities as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And creating the space for people to be able to do what they need to that works for their family, because we don't walk in their shoes. And so we don't know what's right for their family or what's right for them necessarily. They have to figure that out for themselves. That's why no matter what curriculum you make, it's not going to be designed to fit every single child, or what parenting book you write. It's not designed for every
No,
single
definitely.
child.
And I also think,
Um,
it reminds me what you just said of the need for parents in general, mothers, that's the environment I'm in most often, to believe other moms when they're talking to us about their children and what they're experiencing. And to definitely offering ideas is always good, but to offer ideas and support without judgment. And an example that comes up a lot of times in certain areas of education, people talk about living books, and they talk about the opposite of living books being something called twaddle, which are books that basically have no place in a child's life or in a child's home. And I remember a mother telling me that her child was reading a book that would be considered twaddle by so many, but the main character in the book had dyslexia. And that when her son, she said his face lit up like she had never seen it before when that scene in that book came up and he started jumping. He's like, Mommy, Mommy. And I thought to myself, well, she was talking about sharing the book online, and people came back at her, other moms, like, oh, that's twaddle. I wouldn't let my kids read that. You shouldn't be letting them read that. And I thought, no, for your little boy, that is as living as a book will be, because he saw himself reflected in a character that was fun and adventuring and smart and witty. And so I think that as other moms, when we see opportunities, we see a mom that may be doing something differently, or a parent or a family, rather than condemning them or making them feel guilty, let's try to understand and let's celebrate that. Like, I'm so happy that you found a book that your boy loves. I think that that's another way that we can grow our communities and kind of support each other without even understanding fully the situation. When a mom or a father tells you what's going on, I think our best bet is to believe them.
Absolutely. Well, and I was thinking in a lot of ways that dovetails very nicely with what I often am talking to parents about diagnoses. A lot of times people are scared to share with their kids that they have a diagnosis. But one of the things I've discovered is that when we share diagnoses, it opens up the door for connection, because all of a sudden you're not alone. You're not the only person like you. And when you feel like you're the only one, sometimes that makes you feel like there's something wrong with you, or that you're broken, or that you aren't as smart as everybody else. But when you open up that connection and you go, oh my goodness, they're just like me and they do the same thing I do. And this weird thing I do is not all that weird after all. It's normal for people like me.
I love that. And it goes back to what you said a moment ago, to that feeling of belonging. And I think everyone has that feeling. Yeah. And even as an adult, I can say, oh, that doesn't matter, and I don't need this and I don't need that. But I still have that longing for belonging, the longing for belonging. I still have that drive to want to belong. And I can tell when I'm feeling rooted in the place where, before kids, it was like where I was working or where I was at church or my neighborhood or my friend group. And now it's still those same things, but also, within the communities that I'm operating in and who we're doing life with. And there is a feeling of, I don't need 100 best friends, but I just want to belong and feel like there's a seat for me at the table. And I think children even more so are looking for that, even if they can't necessarily articulate it.
Very true. And, I think it also goes back to books too, because sometimes we don't have the opportunity to be around people that are just like us in person, like who have the same cultural heritage or the same diagnosis or, whatever it is. And being able to see it in a book, like you mentioned with the mom who found the book about a child that was dyslexic, that can do the same thing when we're not able to be in that space together, or sometimes even online. I know a lot of autistic adults and teenagers find a lot of community online because they can have more access to other people
that's so true.
Like
I think the online communities in this last year has shown us that though we may become weary at times of being on Zoom or whatever, it also was just a blessing, right? That things would have been so different otherwise. So yes, I think finding that community can happen online. And you're right, books. I talk about that a lot in terms of thinking of books as both mirrors and windows. So mirrors being books where your child can see themselves reflected back. And that's different for everyone. Yes, when I speak, I talk a lot about our ethnicity and that reflecting back, because that was the pain point in my home. And that is the thing, by the way, that turned my little girl around. And that same child that I described some years ago, today, you would not even recognize her. You would be shocked to know that she ever felt that way. And I think a lot of that was when I decided to dig in deep and to put those mirrors in front of her to say that you are valued, you do belong, you are important, you come from a group of important people, and that you're seen, that we see you, and the community sees you, the world sees you, and people like you. And then I think at the same time, it's bringing in those windows that allow our children to be able to glimpse take glimpses of the lives of other people and to begin to learn more and more about how other people live. And it's not voyeurism, because people have asked me, well, isn't that kind of, we just be throwing these things at our kids, like, here, learn about this culture, here, learn about that culture? Well, no, there's always a danger of a single story where you're only presenting this one story, even if it's multiple books over and over. It could be urban poverty, or the story of immigrants coming in and being poor and having nothing, and whatever it may be. If you keep telling that same story to your children, then sure, you're stepping into murky water. But when you open up the door for them to see so many different experiences for different groups of people over time from different places, and how they express themselves, how they move through their daily lives, and they're not just receiving a single story, there's nothing healthier. Because, like you said, we can't always live in an environment where our children will meet people who are different from them in real life. And so I think those differences, it's very easy to say they're black and white, literally and in a pun, but those differences also can be differences. It could be the neurodiversity. It can be a child with a disability, and reading a story where that child has a disability, but the story's not about their disability. I read a book in the book. Is that right? Yeah, it's really important, because I feel the same way, right? My daughter's book club, we read a book. I lead her book club, and we read a book this year where one of the characters had celiac disease, and the main character loved to bake. I mean, that's like her favorite thing. And so for her birthday party, they baked cupcakes and cakes and all this at a bakery. But there just this little mention in the scene of how they set up an area for the friend where she could safely also participate in baking with them. And she wasn't off in a corner by herself, but her friends gathered around her table. And it really wasn't a main part of the plot. It was a small thing, but there was a little girl in that group, and she said, "That's me. I can't do that either." And I thought, wow, how many times has she seen another little girl with celiac in her books? And the way she got excited about that, and the way she saw in this plot that the friends weren't annoyed or bothered by this difference, but instead wanted to do all they could to make sure that their friend could participate. So I think those windows like that and those mirrors are important. And what's a mirror for my family may be a window for yours, and vice versa. So it's just a great way to kind of think about the books, and to check our bookshelves and what we're checking out from the library, and make sure that our children are getting the full feast of what we intend for them in their childhood.
And videos too. I know you've talked about Alvin Ailey's Revelations. That is my favorite ballet of all time.
It's so good. That's a perfect example, because that's a cultural piece, right? And it has the artistic talent that you would see in any dance or professional dance or ballet. But for me, the first time I saw that, it went much deeper than that for me, because that was a mirror. That was where I saw ballerinas that were shaped like me, that were at the top of their craft and being respected as being beautiful. And I saw their elongated, muscular, figures. And I'm thinking, wow, like this is like my people. And I think like that's just as much of a window as it is for when I go and see other performances, and I'm appreciating them from another perspective as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I had the fortune of growing up in Memphis. And so I was always surrounded by lots and lots of windows, and they were always very positive. And I miss that because I had so many more windows than my own children do. And it takes a little bit more of a conscious effort to be able to provide that. Uh, and neurodiversity can be a lot harder to provide some of those windows for, because sometimes you don't know that someone has a disability because so many times they're
Yes.
invisible. And also, because of that invisibility, sometimes we don't feel comfortable talking about them. Like sometimes there's a lot of shame in society talking about depression, for instance. That one, it's only been in the last 20 years or so that people are really talking about it in public.
Yes.
So
No, I
there's
think that's
definitely
good.
some.
Yeah, and I
Mhm.
think that it's
The
the part when we talk about that community building is also when you hear when someone does give you a little bit of an opening there and shares that to show your interest and acceptance of what they're saying and not just kind of like ignore it. But I know when I meet families who are expressing to me that their children have some circumstance, whatever it may be, that might be different than what we typically see, I'm always wanting to know more. Like I want to get to know that child in a way that is safe for them and comfortable for them. And I want my children to as well. I think what the danger and a lot of times is we meet people and we may be well intentioned, but then we set that child up on the shelf like it's a little porcelain doll because we don't know what to say. We don't want to do the wrong thing and we don't want to say the wrong thing. What if this happens and what if that happens? And what that does is
Yes.
you think you're protecting that child, but what you did is you isolated them. And so I find that having that connection between parents where we can openly
Yes.
discuss, like, what does this look like? How does your child show up? This is how my child shows up. How can we bring them together in a way that's safe for both of them? And I wish that those conversations were more common and that we could bring more of this to the forefront, making it
Yes.
normal to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, and one of the, I'll call it a little bit of a tip from psychology is that when we meet people and we're not sure what to say, usually the best thing to do is to ask questions because people love to talk about themselves if you give them the opportunity. And so when you do meet someone who's got a child with disabilities, one of the most common things I've heard is, oh, wow, you have a lot on your plate. Or, well, God only gives special kids to special people. And I'm like,
Yeah.
are you not special?
Yeah.
So the thing we want to like try to be encouraging and supportive, but sometimes really the best thing to do is to
Yes.
ask questions. Wow. So, how did y'all find that out? How does that have an impact on your day to day? What are the things you like the best? What are the things you struggle with the
Yes.
most? Those kinds of things. Opening the
Yes,
conversation.
definitely. And asking also, ahead of time, sometimes before planning with some of my friends, I'll say, hey, I was thinking of doing this with the kids, whatever it is, going to the zoo or whatever. What would that experience be like for your family? Is that a good idea for something for us to do together? Or what are some other ideas of things that your children enjoy? And then I tell them what my kids enjoy too, because nobody wants to always feel like they're the ones who are kind of pulling down the thing or everything's revolving around them. And I'm like, let's both, let's find something that's working for both families the way, that we are showing that we value each other and that we value each other's children. And I know it makes me feel closer to other people when I can see that they value my children. And I want to do the same thing for others.
Absolutely. And I think also, along with this idea of mirrors and windows, and I got this idea actually. I took a multicultural counseling class when I was in graduate school, and I had to interview my family at the end of the class to write a paper about our experiences with different types of diversity and race, class, religion, all of those differences. And my grandfather lived in Birmingham, Alabama, right after the Martin Luther King time period, during the Jim Crow laws. And one of the things he told me when I was doing this interview, he said, a lot of times people will say that racism takes on by family. but he said that he found that most of the time it was when he put it as when people are willing to just drink milk with other people. And what he meant was when people aren't willing to stand by what they see to be right versus what they see to be wrong, and they're willing to just bend their character and their values based on the people
Yes.
around them. And I thought, that's kind of like another part of this whole concept of the power that living books can have to, provide those mirrors and windows into your home, because living books often present ideas that shape our character of who we are as people and what our values are, and if we're going to stand by those values when that gets tough. And I mean, that applies whether we're talking about race, neurodiversity, class, any kind of difference. We have to be willing to develop strong character ourselves so that we can be authentic ourselves and love who we are. And through that, also stand up and love other people for who they are.
Yes, I think that's such a good point, and something I try to talk to my kids about to prepare them, because standing up is not always easy, because now you're basically pulling yourself apart from the crowd to say that we've crossed a point that I'm not willing to cross. And I think that if you don't know ahead of time how hard that could be, you think like my kids are right. They're, especially the younger ones, they're like, if I was there, I wouldn't have done that. If I was there, I would have done this, and that. They're like superhero. They feel like they would always do the right thing at all the time. And I'm like, I'm so glad that you think that, but I want you to know, I want you to remember that, because I want you to be that way. But I want you to know that it's hard, and that this hard thing, it's coming your way, because it comes for all of us. And that in that moment, you have to be prepared to take the road less traveled. And that's how change happens. If enough people take the road less traveled, it becomes the more traveled road. And I think that's just a great point that you bring up.
I have so loved this conversation with you, Amber. This has been something that has always been something that's been important to me as I've had mirrors into my own life and also windows into other people's lives. And it's just such an important topic. And I'm so glad that your daughter brought this up to you so that you ended up creating Heritage Mom and really this whole conversation. And the things you've learned through this experience that you've been able to share with other moms to get us thinking about, okay, what kinds of books, what kinds of videos, what kinds of music, what kinds of experiences am I providing for my children to help them know how to react when they grow up and they run into people who are different from them, and also to appreciate who they are so that they know how to extend that same kind of love and acceptance to others. I think it's beautiful. And I think what you're doing is beautiful and absolutely love it.
Well,
so thank you for being on with me today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
We will see you guys next time. Have a great rest of your week.
We hope you had fun listening to today's episode and gained some new insights into the wonderful variety of people in our world. You can find out more about Amy's advocacy work at amybodkin.com. And remember, special needs kids are people too.